Are you against discrimination, racism, sexism and homophobia? That's great of you and very important, but why are you against that? I can tell you why. We want to reject discrimination because it is always irrational and brutal. Discrimination means putting an individual or a group at a disadvantage because of an arbitrary trait. Such discrimination can take the form of racist comments, homophobic laws, and even acts of violence committed against entire groups. But no matter how mild or brutal the discriminatory act is, it is always wrong, because discrimination knows no shades of grey. But what is such an arbitrary trait anyway? This is a trait that does not play an ethically significant role in a specific situation. In racism, for example, this would be the skin color. In sexism, gender. In ableism, health condition. And in homophobia, it's the sexual preference. Oppressing someone based on these factors is of course totally irrational and wrong, because we have long known that sexuality, gender or skin color do not change the value of an individual. So what do all these forms of discrimination have in common? Discrimination is always based on a feeling of superiority, and it is always a learned behavior. No small child is racist or sexist. No, we get this oppressive mindset from our parents, our environment, or the media. That discrimination is a learned behavior applies to any form of oppression. Also to speciesism. What is speciesism, you ask? Speciesism is the moral discrimination of individuals based on their species. Speciesism is the greatest moral emergency on the planet and claims several billion victims every year. But speciesism isn't just the greatest form of oppression, it's also the first form of discrimination that we learn as children. Before we can even speak full sentences, we learn to love the dog that lives with us as a family member, but at the same time to oppress, butcher and eat the pig that we find as pork on our plates. But what is the ethically significant difference between these animals? Why would we eat some animals but not others? Would you eat dog steak or roast a dolphin? Why do we find the thought of stealing the milk of a horse or a cat totally terrifying, but at the same time stealing and drinking the milk of a mother cow to be absolutely normal? This differentiation in so-called pets and so-called livestock is made practically only on the basis of their species, and their oppression is just as irrational and brutal as the discrimination based on gender, sexuality or skin color. The second form of speciesism is based on our discrimination between humans and non-human animals. We see us as the crown of all creation and claim that we have the right to oppress and use all other animals just because these animals aren't human and we are stronger. But once again, what is the significant difference between us humans and the so-called farm animals that justifies dismembering, smothering, enslaving, stealing their children and murdering billions of them, but not doing the same with humans? Because let's imagine we'd replace the animals in the industries with humans. How would we call that then? Slavery? Mass murder? A holocaust? You see, suffering and sentience aren't exclusive to the human race. The resulting interest in not suffering and the basic right of any sentient being to not be treated as an object must therefore be granted equally, regardless of skin color, gender, and yes, also species. Back then we said, they're just women, they're just blacks, and now we say, they're just animals. But just as women's rights, gay marriage and the end of classical slavery have prevailed in big parts of the world, so can the right of animals to not be treated as objects prevail too. And we now have the human privilege to fight for this justice on behalf of the animals instead of using our power against them. So, which side of history do you want to stand on? Will you continue to support discrimination and violence against other animals as a non-vegan? Or will you go vegan from now on and fight against the biggest form of discrimination on the planet, against the ethical emergency of speciesism? See, if you don't want to be a racist, then you mustn't be a speciesist either, because I hope you understand now, speciesism is racism, just towards the animals. So if you're really against discrimination and unnecessary violence, then prove it. Go vegan and live with compassion instead of discrimination.